Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today I'm with Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy. And if you guys don't know about his channel, I'm sure a lot of you might know about his channel by now, but if you don't, go and let me just pull it up real quick because
Yeah, sure.
it's definitely a good channel, definitely worth checking out. And we're going to talk about Christmas season and
Oh yeah.
where's Christmas come from, all that good stuff. Is it pagan? Is it not? I think we're gonna have some common ground and we're gonna agree on some things. We might have a few
hmm
disagreements, which is kind of normal for someone like you and someone like me. So, but it'll be fun. Maybe we can agree on some things that are so there's a lot of misinformation out there. People go too far with it sometimes. A lot of times it's well, I'm not going to say who, but a lot of times people get on the internet and just read stuff, and if they want it to be true, then it's true. They won't check it. You know what I mean? You get a lot of that stuff happening on both sides of the aisle, atheists and theists. And
hmm
so, yeah, so let's get into this discussion and welcome.
Oh yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Um, let's see. Let's start off with some of I want to get into some of the memes that you and I were discussing that catapulted this discussion to begin with. We were going back and forth, throwing memes at each other, just kind of laughing at some of this stuff. And
Uh-huh.
let's get that out the way first. But I want to play this clip from Professor McClellan, I think it is, and
Uh-huh. Yeah, Dan McClellan. He does
yeah,
a pretty big guy on TikTok.
yeah, he has a really good approach to this because there's a lot of TikTokers. Right now, every year around this time, you get a lot of TikTokers putting out. Christmas is basically just it's just a pagan. Christians stole paganism and made Jesus born on that day. We're gonna get into all that stuff and sort of like weed through what's true and what's not. But let's play this clip from Dan, and I think this will start.
Christmas is not a Christian holiday, it is a pagan holiday.
Hey everybody, I don't think this is an accurate statement. Certainly things like gift giving and revelry were borrowed from the celebration of Saturnalia, and many times we have pagan communities converting to Christianity and continuing some of their traditions. So we have pagans bringing evergreen boughs into the home, decorating with them, and then Protestants innovate on that in the 16th century in Germany and decorate full trees and then bring them into the home for Christmas. So there are relationships in some of the traditions, but those traditions differ wildly around the world. And already by 200 CE-ish, we have Christians identifying the 25th of December as Jesus' birthday based on ancient traditions about the date of someone's death relating to the date of their conception. 9 months later, we have their birth. And those calculations predate the arrival of Sol Invictus' celebration in Rome on the 25th. And Saturnalia seemed to be mostly celebrated the week before anyway.
That last sentence was really important because
hmm
Christians, we have evidence of Christians trying to calculate his birth, which is not in the text. So they're obviously going to have to do it outside of the text. And you do have evidence of Christians trying to figure out is he conceived on this day? Is he born on this day? And then if you go back even farther, before the change of the empire or the Roman Republic to the empire, people's zodiac star sign would be based on the time they were conceived. So the time you were conceived is actually when, like, Augustus is a Capricorn, but he's born in August. So he was
hmm
in December, and according to Suetonius, it was a 10-month long pregnancy. So it's like, why is he a Capricorn when he's born in August? Well, he was conceived in December, and so yeah. So let's get into that. And what are your do you have anything you object in that video at all or no?
To the beginning, I guess. I agree with most of what he said there. I think he's spot on. The whole thing about the idea of gift giving and revelry being borrowed from Saturnalia, I'm a little skeptical of that because gift giving is such a common human custom. Like we see it like in a lot of different celebrations, and like for example, like this book, the Dictionary of English Folklore, or the Encyclopedia of Christmas and New Year. They mention like there's gifts, there's midwinter gifts that happened in a lot of different customs, but they note in that really the idea of Christmas giving really did not become super popular until about they say it's essential to the modern Christmas. These came to the fore in the 1840s and the 1850s, replacing a much older tradition of New Year's gifts between adults. So I would sort of say I don't think it directly came from Saturnalia. I mean, there's probably a correlation because sometimes correlations happen, but they may have risen independently because people like to get gifts at the end of the year. That just seems like hey, it's the end of the year. Let's celebrate. Here's some gifts, and so we saw that originally with New Year's, and so I think it's kind of a stretch to say that maybe it came from Saturnalia. Although if there is a paper trail going back to it, sure, but I think that would just be too general of a custom to make that kind of connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. That's probably where we disagree. I honestly think that Saturnalia was kind of like the gift giving time. Like, yeah, I agree with you. There
It
probably
was.
was gift giving in other festivals. Like when they throw a Bacchanalia festival, there probably was people giving gifts there too, just like people would give gift at a birthday party. You're probably right about that. But when it comes to Saturnalia, it was like that's like the main attribute of Saturnalia was this idea of slaves became equal to their masters. That was one of the big attributes. The other one was people giving gifts. I mean, I pulled up some of these sorts from some of the primary sources from first century writers, third century writers.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you that there definitely was gift giving at Saturnalia. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, this is from what's his name? I forgot to put it down. Oh, this is what's his name? Oh, Catalyst. Sorry, I don't know why I didn't put the name on here, but I just cut this off from the book I was looking through. At the Saturnalia, Umber, you sent me all the presents. 5 days had raked in 12 leaf notepads, 7 toothpicks, further a complimentary sponge, 1 napkin. I mean, this reminds you of that song. It's like 1 turtle dove. Like when you read this, it's just like he's naming off gifts, like, and it's Saturnalia. And so I think you can confidently say that the whole gift giving tradition in December probably goes back to Saturnalia, but that doesn't mean that Christians are like doing something pagan by doing that. Like, I'll agree
I would
level with you on that. If you give somebody a gift during Christmas season, it's not like you're worshiping Set or worshiping an ancient god or something. You know what I mean?
And I would say Christians probably, sort of got the idea from the scriptures. The Magi bringing gifts to Jesus at his birth was probably more of an inspiration for that. I mean, Tanya Golovich in Encyclopedia of Christmas and New Year says the earliest historical records of Christmas gifts goes back to Germany in the 16th century. So it seems to have come much later than when Saturnalia died out. So if there's some sort of connection there, I agree, it's not pagan. But it would be such a far, in terms of the paper trail, like the different texts with Christmas gifts and Saturnalia gifts. I would be kind of skeptical of making a direct connection, is what I would say.
Yeah. I just had one more. I'm not going to go through a million sources, but I just had one more that I thought was relevant from Seneca the Younger in his Epistle 18. In the month of December, when the greatest part of the city is in a bustle, loose reins are given to the public dissipation. Everywhere you may hear the sound of great preparations, as if there was some real difference between the days devoted to Saturn and those for transacting business. Where you hear, I would willingly confer with you as to the plan of our conduct, whether we should eve in our usual way or avoid singularity, but take a better supper and throw off the toga. And I think even today, when this time of the year, a lot of businesses shut down. People get their Christmas school shut down. Kind of everybody just kind of lays, take off the toga, relax, have a good time. And I think I'm not even gonna say it's just for Saturnalia. I think it's just standard for holidays. And you can't blame Christians for wanting to keep that thing going.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, but sometimes. I think we can both agree, though, is that the idea that Christmas comes from paganism, that's a modern myth that I blame a lot on like the History Channel for like popularizing and getting out there. The other thing I might disagree with Dr. McClellan on that video is this idea that maybe the whole decoration with I think he mentioned something like with regards to decorating the homes with greenery may go back to some sort of paganism. Again, I'm kind of skeptical of that as well. I think the earliest reference to bringing in decorations that might be associated with Christmas like greenery. They start to come again at the same time as gift giving in Germany. It's like the earliest reference to like Christmas trees dates back to Alsace, France in the 1500s, which mentions like the limit of a size of a Christmas tree. So again, it seems like even if that decorating of greenery goes back to paganism, or I mean, that would not be a pagan custom. It's just people like to decorate in the winter. What's
Well,
available in the winter? Well, evergreen trees are available. So I mean, like, it's just a common decorations can happen around the same time.
well, I was going to say that to you is that it's not just with the decorating group. Like if you go back to the Roman days where there are all these different festivals throughout the year, every month has its own festival for whatever's going on. It's not just Saturnalia that's doing the decorating with it usually was laurel and ivy. I was looking into this, and there was also reeds too. And it's not just Saturnalia. That was for any festival. So if you had a Bacchanalia festival, ivy, laurel, reeds, go throw it up on the. If you dedicated a temple to a god, even if it was just a Roman emperor builds a new temple to Sol, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just standard. You're going to take laurel, you're going to take ivy, you're going to decorate it, you're going to throw that goes for anything. So that's like saying, so it would be like saying, if I threw a birthday party and I had a cake and you had a birthday party after me and you had a cake, it'd be like saying you're stealing from me. I mean, it's just standard for birthday parties. So it's not like one stealing from the other. That's just how you do a party.
Yeah, we could say the same with like.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say
you could say the same thing with like mistletoe.
Yeah, mistletoe. I don't know much about that. I was looking to see if there's any traditions in that. I didn't go into Germanic stuff. I was looking through Roman stuff. I didn't find anything about Roman stuff. I do know that Balder, the Norse god, if he has a mistletoe on his head, he can get killed or something like that, and that's how he dies.
So yeah, that comes from there are some scholars I think that actually Balder and Loki were late additions to the pantheon, the Norse pantheon, based on Jesus and Satan. Now I'm not sure how accurate that is. There are scholars that disagree, of course, but that is a possibility. But I mean, the sort of references to like the Balder and the mistletoe come actually in like post-Christian times as well. But the idea of I've heard some people try to claim that mistletoe was associated with the god Saturn in ancient Rome, and that's just not true. I mean, he was an agricultural deity. You're not going to associate him with what would be considered a weed if you have an agricultural deity. That doesn't make sense. Christmas mistletoe, we start to see it being used as a decoration in like the 1600s, maybe the 1500s, and then the custom of kissing under the mistletoe. Again, like they say in this book, it doesn't show up until the end of the 1700s among the servant class in Britain. So it seemed to be just become an independent folk tradition that started in Britain. Some people will try to connect it to this reference in Pliny the Elder, who mentions that the Druids in Gaul, if they found mistletoe on an oak, they thought it was sacred. So they would take it and they thought it would cure like sicknesses, I think animal fecundity. So, but it doesn't associate with any sort of winter festival and had to be on an oak. So, they don't really connect it with anything regarding, Christmas or some sort of winter festival.
That's a good point. Chris says that Balder and Loki aren't that late. There are some scholars who think this is. There doesn't seem to be a good case for this, given that they appear rather fluidly throughout the Poetic Edda.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's a pretty good point that's brought up for sure. I just mentioned it as a possibility that I know that some pagans have even told me, like actual people that, honor the Norse deities have told me this is a possibility. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But yeah, there's a whole debate about that right there.
Yeah. So I was looking into the whole reeds and pine tree thing, and I wasn't able to find anything regarding Saturnalia or Christmas, but I did find, and I actually knew about this earlier, but I did find some interesting stuff on Attis. I don't know if you know about it.
Yes, I do.
During the winter or during the spring equinox. First of all, there's a Holy Week for Attis. I got the notes with me, and the starts with the 15th. They bring out the reeds. The 22nd, they bring out the trees, and then there's a day of blood where the new initiates would consecrate themselves, we'll say, and the day followed by a day of washing. So you have Arnobius writes about this. He says, "What do the little branches of the tree decked with and girt round with garlands of violets? Do they not signify how the mother adorned the pine with the earliest blossoms as a memorial and testimony of her sad misfortune? What is the meaning of the Gali with hair disheveled, beating their breasts?" Okay, that doesn't matter. That's not what I'm getting at. But he's talking about the meaning of this is what he thinks the meaning of the pine tree is. What does that pine tree mean, which you always introduce in appointed days into the sanctuary of the mother of the gods? Is it not symbolic of that tree under which the mad, unhappy youth laid hands on himself, in which the parent of the gods consecrated as solace for a grief? And yeah, so I just thought that was interesting, but that has nothing to do with the Christmas season. It's just so that'd be a stretch. You'd have to say somehow that you're connecting with spring equinox with the winter solstice somehow.
Oh, I've heard fundamentalist Christians try to tell me that that's the Christmas tree. It comes from the Attis tree, and they'll make this kind of argument. And so what I would throw to them is places like Isaiah 41, where God says in verse 19 that the pine, along with some of these other trees like the acacia, these are symbols of me. So right then and there, you can see that even in the Bible, you can use the pine tree as a symbol of the God of the Bible. But the actual Christmas tree, we don't see show up again until the 1500s in Alsace, France. And no one knows the origin. There's this idea that maybe it came from St. Boniface. There's a legend. St. Boniface cut down an oak tree dedicated to, I think, Odin. And when he wasn't struck by lightning, he pointed to a fir tree and said it's a symbol of Christ. That's a legend. I think a more likely explanation is that the Christmas tree is entirely Christian in origin, a story. It came from Adam and Eve plays. So in the Middle Ages, they would often perform Adam and Eve plays. And the feast day of Adam and Eve is on December 24th. And so if you're going to do an Adam and Eve play, you need a paradise tree. But there's not a lot of trees in Germany available, except for like evergreen trees. So they'd get one of those trees decorated with apples. The earliest mention of ornaments seems to be apples. So they would decorate it. And then that's probably how the Christmas tree got associated with Christmas Eve and then, Christmas Day, just sort of morphing from this paradise tree that was associated with Adam and Eve plays. So again, the first time any sort of mention of a Christmas tree comes up, and it is an Alsace ordinance from the 1500s. And so there's really no evidence it goes back to paganism, unlike what a lot of people tend to think.
Speaking of Adam and Eve, I wanted to see if there's any ancient Jewish mentions of Saturnalia, or what do they think? And I found one reference from the Babylonian Talmud. So it's obviously not ancient. Well, I guess it's like, it's ancient, but it's not like ancient. Anyways, you know what I mean by that. This is an interesting passage. And I had to clip this out and show everybody, because it's really, when the first man saw that the day was continuously shortening, he said, "Woe is me, because I have sinned. The world darkens around me and returns to formlessness and void. This is the death to which heaven has sentenced me." He decided to spend 8 days in fasting and prayer. When he saw the winter solstice and he saw that the day was continuously lengthening, which is that's what happens in the solstice. The sun starts to get the days start to get more longer, and he saw that the days continuously lengthening. He said, "It is the order of the world." He went and feasted for 8 days. The following year, he feasted for both. He established them in heaven's name, but they established them in the name of idolatry. So they're whoever wrote that is giving a nod, like saying, "Okay, Saturnalia, we know it's a thing," and Adam started it, but it's an idolatry. Like it's kind of crazy if you think about it.
Yeah, it's this it's syncretism kind of things. I mean, they try to find things in the pagan culture, and instead of adopting it, they'll try to, in the Jewish culture, they would often try to say it was corrupted, like somehow this was originally something good, and then people corrupted it. But yeah, I mean,
and that you just reminded me, because I had one more thing about the Attis thing, because you're gonna call this heresy, but I love it.
Oh no,
the Nicene preacher from the 2nd century recognized that the Attis movement was something, because he's in Phrygia, he's in that same area, and there was a hymn to Attis. It's "Blessed One, whether born of Kronos, Zeus or Rhea, I loudly hail thee, Attis. You the Assyrians call thrice desired Adonis. All of Egypt calls you Osiris. Samothracians call you Adamus. Phrygians call you Pappus, a corpse, a god, unfruitful goat herd, green ear of the harvested grain, fruitful almond born, player of the pipes." Now, when you said syncretism, this is what reminded me of that, because the Nicene preacher actually took this hymn and applied it to Jesus. Said they're wrong. It's not Attis. There were really all these gods are just their way of trying to get at the real thing, which is Christ. Now, obviously, the reason why we even have this would have been lost if it wasn't for Hippolytus. He was writing about this and calling it heresy, basically saying the Nicene preacher was out of his mind. He's a heretic. But I think it's interesting to point out that before the church period, during the 2nd century, before when Christianity was just kind of a private thing, you had different Christian cults, different Christian groups, whatever you want to call it, applying this syncretism to Jesus.
Oh, I'll do you one better. It's in Acts. Acts chapter 17, verse 28. Paul takes the pagan Stoic philosopher Aratus, and like as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring, and he applies it to God. It's like this whole idea of triumphant reclamation. Like, you meant that to honor, your deity, but we're going to take it and say it's really about the God of Israel. I mean, that's a very big thing in the Old Testament. I mean, Karl Vandertorn, I've seen him do numerous examples, like Psalms and other places in Isaiah. This idea of repurposing language to make it about the God of Israel, and Christians just did the same thing. It doesn't. I wouldn't say that's a bad thing, because it's not like they're adopting pagan doctrines or pagan religious beliefs. They're taking semantics, language, and they're saying, well, this is really cool. Let's just make it be about our God. I mean, that's a common practice.
Sure. Johnny Oxernicus, I hope I said that right. Thank you for that super sticker. Appreciate that. And by the way, this is sort of just a laid back live. You can just throw up a super chat at any time and I'll address it. Or if I see something that, something I'm not going to be able to see every comment, but here's a good one. In Germanic tradition, the holy tree was a central part of the cultic groves. It had common ritual associations. There were several such groves, including rather important ones in Germany and Uppsala.
Oh yeah, I remember there's a legend about Saint Martin going into one of these groves and wanting to cut down the tree in the middle.
Yeah, I read that too. I didn't read that. Somebody told the Religion for Breakfast showed me that. He's like, yeah, because he does a lot of work in like ancient magical relics, and he was talking about that. Yeah, there's
I just gave a sermon. Actually, I was invited to a church over the weekend to speak, and I actually spoke on this. And I said, part of me kind of wishes that Christmas trees were pagan, because there's a meme I remember, and it's like, of course, I enjoy feasting at the end of the year with the trophies of my conquered enemies. Like, it was a Catholic meme this guy put out, and so like, it's like, if Christmas really was pagan, it would be kind of cool, because it's like, you meant this to honor your deity, and now it's just a trophy on our Christian Christmas wall kind of thing. And so like, but it's just, there's no evidence the Christmas tree goes back to paganism. Not even the date December 25th does any.
Oh, that's where we got to get into next.
Okay.
Now we're going to spend some time on this, because I think we're going to have some common ground, but I feel like we're going to clash on this a little bit, just a little bit. Because I'm not going to sit there and say, yeah, let's read the super chat. What about thank you, Johnny, for the super chat. What about the claim that there were 1225 sun god days? I got some good clips from Religion for Breakfast, and I wonder if we can they're quick little 2-minute clips that we can just to set this, because he's a real scholar into this, like he's doing his thing. And maybe you might disagree with some of this stuff, or you might agree. He's not. Let's just play the clip.
Raised the profile of Sol, but this was definitively not solar monotheism. This popularity continued into the reign of Constantine the Great, who is probably most famous for showing favor to Christianity after experiencing some sort of conversion. But before turning to Christianity, Constantine was a devotee to the sun as well. According to one source, in 310 AD, 2 years before the Battle of Milvian Bridge, when Constantine rose to power, Constantine stopped at a temple of Apollo with his army and claimed that Apollo appeared to him in a vision, prophesying that Constantine would live a long life and rule the world. Now, as we've seen, Romans often associated Apollo with the sun, and even identified him as Sol Invictus, and it seems Constantine equated the two as well. And even after his conversion, Constantine continued to interpret Jesus and the Christian God through his. When it comes to Mithras or Horus having a birthday on December 25th, there is absolutely no evidence to work with, and you can dismiss such claims out of hand. But the topic is definitely more complicated when it comes to Sol Invictus, because you do have a few sources to work with. You have the calendar of 354, you have the quotation from Julian the Apostate, who states public games were celebrated for Helios in late December. You also have an anonymous, probably 4th century Christian homily on the solstices and equinoxes that mentions December 25th as Sol Invictus's birthday. This evidence demonstrates that at least in the 4th century, and possibly starting in the late 3rd century under Emperor Aurelian, some Romans recognized December 25th as the birthday of the sun god, and that it was marked with some sort of festival. It's also evidence that Christians were aware of this day's association with the sun god. But is that enough evidence to support the history of religion's theory, that Christians consciously and intentionally aimed to substitute the sun god day for Jesus? I don't think this theory is supported. We don't have any Christian authority saying that they chose December 25th as Jesus' birthday to compete with Sol Invictus. Thus, it's an argument from silence. This idea does not pop up until the 1100s from a hostile Christian. When did Romans start marking December 25th as a birthday for Sol? How important was that festival? When did Christians start making December 25th as a birthday for Jesus? How important was Sol Invictus and his festival in making that decision? Let's start with the first two questions. Stephen Hyman strongly stresses that December 25th was neither a long-standing nor an especially important official feast day of Sol. I'm going to say that again. December 25th was not a long-standing nor an especially important official feast day of Sol Invictus. You should probably have already guessed this based on the previous historical overview. The sun god was a minor deity until the late 3rd century. We simply don't know when December 25th entered the Roman calendar as a holiday for Sol Invictus. It might have been 274 under Aurelian, and I actually think that's the case. But our clearest ancient evidence that explicitly mentions December 25th as a birthday of Sol Invictus is found in the so-called Chronograph of 354, which, as the name suggests, is a compilation of chronological texts composed or compiled in 354 CE, 80 years after Aurelian. One of the documents included in this compilation is a calendar listing the festivals that were celebrated in the Roman Empire in the mid-350s. A single line in the month of December names December 25th the Natalis Invicti, or the birthday of Invictus. And it says that on that day, 30 chariot races are to be held in celebration. The text on screen is how it appears in the calendar, a single line mostly consisting of abbreviations. The Roman numeral 8 stands for 8th day before Calends of January, or in other words, December 25th. N stands for Natalis. CM stands for Circenses Missi, 30 games ordered. It should be noted that this word Natalis is confusing. Very simply, it can be translated as birthday, but as the scholar Michel Salzman argues, it can also simply refer to a celebration to honor a god, or the anniversary of the dedication day of a god's temple. Salzman argues that this day marked the day that Emperor Aurelian dedicated his new temple to Sol in the 270s. Now,
that was a huge point at the end. The 270s is where you basically get this. The question is, I mean, because 270, you already have a fully functioning church system in Christianity. They're not like it's not like they're just starting out then and borrowing. Like, they're already established by then. So it would be hard to argue that this is like influencing Christians later on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and scholars like Thomas Schmidt, Peter Nothaft, I believe is how you pronounce it. He mentioned one. I've always pronounced his name Stephen Hidgmans, but maybe I've been wrong. Stephen Hymans is what he said, is another good one. Thomas Taylor, in his book, The Origins of the Liturgical Calendar, argued that from evidence that Christians have sort of put Jesus' birthday on December 25th in the 200s because of their own calculations. They thought Jesus would be born on the same day he was conceived. They thought he died on March 25th. So they thought that's when he was conceived. Count forward 9 months, you get December 25th. So
I always wondered that. Why did they just assume he was conceived in the day that he died?
It's about, it was very much this idea of perfection, completion, like you want to, very much in line with also, they were also interested in like, they were interested in the stars and the cycles of the sun and the moon. And they thought, like in God's perfect universe, things were going to happen in line with those types of things. So it was just part of the early completion, the early idea that a prophet, because he was a prophet of God, he should die on the same day he was conceived, that kind of thing. So just to say that, even if Sol Invictus was on December 25th before Christians started using that date, that doesn't mean they did it to sort of co-opt Sol Invictus. They picked that date from their own calculations. I remind people
that's a point that I'll grant. It's a good point, but you have to admit, though, that's a very hard thing for somebody. You have to admit that's probably going to be hard for a lot of people to accept, that just blindly say, yeah, he was probably born on the same day he got killed.
Oh, of course. I don't believe that's true at all. It was an early Christian belief that we can see they had about prophets. I mean, so that's why we picked December 25th. I don't think Jesus was necessarily born on that day. I mean, it's a 1 in 365 chance he was. I don't really care, honestly.
1 in 3.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't
what?
care.
Well, because that's another thing, is the winter solstice isn't even on December 25th. It's actually December 23rd.
Well, it depends on who you're reading. If you're going to read like the calendar of Antiochus, he puts it on the 22nd.
Yeah.
The Julian calendar puts it on the 25th. I believe Pliny and Columella, one of them does the 26th, one of them does the 23rd. I remember that from Ronald Hutton's book.
Saturnalia ends on the 23rd. Doesn't even go to the 25th. It starts on the 17th and ends on the 23rd.
Yeah, originally. And then I think by Macrobius, it was shortened to 3 days.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, that there weren't wide agreement on the day that the solstice happened. But I mean, Ronald Hutton says that, basically the Romans prior to the 4th century didn't really treat it like a holiday from what we can gather. They treated it like a celestial event, the same way we treat December 21st. They sort of just go, oh, okay, yeah, anyway, back to work. They had the Saturnalia festival, and then they had the New Year festival. In between that, they didn't really have any major holidays as far as we can tell until you got to the time of Constantine. And as Religion for Breakfast mentioned, there might be, it might have gone back to Aurelian. I don't think so. I don't, because again, we don't see that showing up in the Julio-Claudian Fasti inscriptions. I think it was an important holiday that we should have some more references to.
We also lost a lot of the Fasti. December, the whole December section's lost.
We have some. I remember reading that you could find. What was that?
Ovid's Fasti?
Ovid's Fasti. We only have half of Ovid's Fasti. The other 6 months are missing. Right. So yeah, that's there. But I mean, like the Philocalian calendar from 354 he mentioned, mentions that Aurelian honored the sun with chariot races every 4 years in October. So that's an interesting line there. It doesn't. So maybe
that's what Religion for Breakfast points out, that the more important day for Sol Invictus was actually in October.
Exactly. So my working, what I think, and this is following some of the scholars I've read, is that I think that when Constantine came to power and he started, giving Christians more prominence, the pagans wanted to worship on that day. So they actually placed a holiday in the 4th century on December 25th to compete with Christmas. And we do see evidence that the pagans were trying to mock or compete with Christians in some ways. Like the Historia Augusta is a forged work in the 4th century that mentions all these letters. And we know that it probably was written by pagans in that time, mocking Christians, because it mentions that worshippers of Serapis were also called Christians.
Yeah, I know that part. Yeah.
And so it's it was probably we see that pagans are getting a little mad at Christians at this time period for obvious reasons. So it's likely that they may have placed a holiday on that day to compete with Christmas. I think that's a more likely hypothesis than the idea that Christians put, Christmas on December 25th to compete with Sol Invictus.
So I was trying to track all the evidence that we have of the Roman celebrations and how they, because you go back far enough, you have your Roman festivals, and they're all boom, 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 boom. But somewhere along the line, they'd start changing them. And then by the time, the calendar from Caesar to Constantine, completely different now. What happened? And I'm trying to figure out what happened. When were these changes made? And the only thing I can really find was when Elagabalus became the emperor. He's a Syrian priest of the sun god. He did some interesting things. And this is what it says. When he entered the city, neglecting all the affairs of the provinces, he established Elagabalus as the god on Palatine Hill. Because before this, that was the regular Roman religion, was just pure pagan, Zeus and Mars and all that. And then all of a sudden, this dude comes in, and he built him a temple, which he desired to transfer the emblem of the Great Mother, the fire of Vesta. So you have all that normal Roman stuff, the Palladium, the shields of the Sally, and all the Romans held sacred, purposing that the god might be worshipped at Rome, save only Elagabalus. He declared furthermore that the religions of the Jews and the Samaritans and the rites of the Christians must also be transferred to this place in order that the priesthood of Elagabalus might include the mysteries of every form of worship. I think that's interesting, because what that says is, because Elagabalus obviously gets killed, and they try to erase his name and they hate him after that. But his changes in religion were very popular. Nobody went back and reverted back to the old ways. In fact, 2 decades later, you get Aurelian and you get Sol Invictus starts getting more and more popular following this. You see evidence of this. He actually made his changes made an effect on Roman religion forever. Now the last part where he says he transferred the rights of the Christians, I don't know what that means. I don't know how true that is, but what that could probably tell us is that all of a sudden in Roman religion, Christianity is being more accepted. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I wonder how influential that really was. I remember reading a paper by the same guy that we saw in the clip, Stephen Hidgmans or Hymans. He wrote a paper, really interesting, called "The Sun That Did Not Rise in the East," and he's an expert in Roman sun worship. And so what he argues in this paper is that Aurelian really was not much influenced by Elagabalus. It was not. It was more of a Roman idea, trying to get back to the Roman roots.
Yeah,
the Elagabalus influence is
stuff
not
they
as powerful.
I agree with that. But
yeah.
But there's another scholar who, because there's people who try to say there's two different sun gods, and that's been debunked. This is like, I would say that the idea of Elagabalus as the sun god in Rome, they stopped doing that, and it's just Sol Invictus, because they're sticking to their Roman, Latin, vibe, I guess you would say. But I would lean on the side of this got the ball rolling for Sol Invictus.
Possibly. I mean, yeah, there's
wrong.
scholarly debate. I think, again, the paper, The Sun That Did Not Rise in the East, points out that Sol was very much a Roman idea. Aurelian was really trying to get back to the Roman roots, figure out what, made them Roman. And so that's when Sol started to become more popular in the Roman Empire, of course.
Did you know that I found this out, that the temple that Aurelian dedicated to Sol was the temple of Elagabalus?
Oh, interesting.
Rededicated it as Sol Invictus in 274.
Well, I mean, that makes sense because, why build a whole new temple? I mean, just, take over what's already there. I mean,
right.
No reason to build a whole new temple. But there's a lot of debate around that because, again, there's a lot of documents missing. Aurelian sort of rises out of this, what is it, 3rd century crisis when the Roman Empire almost even split entirely. So, I mean, it was quite a hectic time for Rome, actually, right before Aurelian rose to power.
Yeah. Here's a good point right here. There's no evidence Mithra was born of a virgin on December 25th. So we need to bother with that. It was made up. Yeah. I mean, that's just like, you hear that all the time. Like, people are really, really convinced by that. And there's not the funny part about Mithra is we don't have any text. All we have are, like, let me see if I can find one. We just have like these engravings, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have like real, there is no like scrolls, there's no documents, there's no papyrus. It's just like, here's we found an old temple of Mithra right here, and engraved in some of the columns has a couple things here, and you have to like piece together like whatever you have to find out what the idea of this Mithra was. There's really nothing to work off.
Yeah, they didn't really leave text behind. I actually I think this year on TikTok, I actually had to debunk a claim because there was a guy arguing that Mithra being born from a rock is like the same as a virgin birth. And I was like, no, that's a category error. That's not a virgin birth, but still comes up on TikTok, this idea that Jesus' birthday is connected to Mithra, as well as Tammuz, and of course the ridiculous ones like Nimrod. They'll try to claim they were born on December 25th. But really the only birthday we can find on December 25th is of Sol, or the sun. And, that's comes from the Philokaelian calendar is the only festival we have.
And by the way, people try to say that Sol and Mithra are the same thing. They're not. If you look at the Mithraic iconography, Mithra would sit right next to Sol, like they're brothers. They're hanging. Oh, right. They're different deities.
Yeah, the Mithraic cult took advantage of the rise of Sol for sure. They were like, hey, great sun worship. We're all in on this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched the show actually called Raised by Wolves on HBO? Because it's actually a really interesting show. In the show, it's like a post-apocalyptic future, but it's like a world where Christianity didn't rise, and instead Mithraism.
Yeah, there was like the atheist, and then the Sol Invictus worshippers, right?
Right. It's based on a lot of like myths that like Christianity and Mithraism had a lot of overlap when there's very little connections there. But it's just an interesting concept, and the idea that Mithraism rose to power and not Christianity, because I always found that just fascinating.
And I remember I used to be a mythicist, and I remember watching one of the Carriers Richard Carrier's talks, one of these like completely off the wall.
Oh, he's your boy. You love him.
And he's talking about Mithra, saying that Mithra went through this great passion and suffering, and he didn't die necessarily and rise, but he has the same model. And I'm thinking, where is he getting this from? Because there's no text about Mithra. Him having what did you look at his picture of him slaying a bull and make a story based off? Did you make your own inference on what was happening there? That's all you can really do about Mithra.
Right. I mean, you get it
I
from
could be wrong. Unless someone prove me wrong, show me some story about Mithra that we found all of a sudden. But because I've asked scholars about that. Like, where's the idea with Mithra having some sort of passion and suffering? Or, they all look at me like I'm crazy. Where did you hear that from? And I'm just
yeah,
like, I'm getting bad information, I guess. You know what I mean? From PhD.
yeah.
It happens all the
yeah.
time.
Yeah, I know. Mithra is one of those really obscure ones that you saw in the Zeitgeist film from like 20 years ago, but every now and then it still comes up. There's just not a lot of evidence that Mithraism had anything to do with Christianity. Like the one correlation I can find is that they worshipped on Sunday, which you would expect. It's the day of the sun. And I mean, Christians pick that day because that's the day Jesus rose from the dead. Again, correlation is not causation.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like people will point out the winter. I used to do this too. The spring, like the idea of Jesus being worshipped during the spring equinox time every year. Now, it's very easy to say, "Wow, that can't be a coincidence." Of course, they're just borrowing from the pagans. Where once again, you get this sort of claim. But if he really did go down to Jerusalem for the Passover, and he got killed on that weekend, then you can't. Then that's the story. Like that's the claim. Like you have to kind of the evidence is sort of on the person to debunk that, I guess, because the story is that he went down on Passover and was killed. You don't have any sources you don't have any sources early on denying this. Even pagan or even the Talmud is like, yeah, Passover Eve he was hung on a tree. Like you kind of there's enough source. I think there's enough there to say that probably happened. Can't say 100%, but I can probably. I'm leaning towards that. Probably, definitely, like not definitely. That probably happened. Probably did get killed on Passover Eve. Now, with that being said, all of a sudden now that's when you're going to celebrate your Easter on that day from now on. It's gonna have to. It just happened that way. It's not that hard to believe, though.
Yeah, correlation is not causation. Just because some pagans had sacred pine trees, that doesn't mean the Christmas tree came from there. Correlation, not causation. Jesus died around Passover, and just because happened around the equinox, that doesn't mean there's a correlation there. I mean, the parallel mania kind of thing. It's like what I try to tell people is history is really big. A lot of stuff has happened in history. There's going to be overlap occasionally in terms of things like, there's the story about how when the Mongols tried to invade Japan twice, both times it got stopped by a typhoon. I mean, sometimes things just happen the same way over again. I mean, so even if something in Christianity is so close to resembling something in paganism, that doesn't mean that one borrowed from the other or somehow one influenced the other. We got to be very careful with that because, correlation isn't causation, as we've said.
Well, speaking of the parallel mania stuff, let's look at some of these memes.
Oh, God.
God born on December 25th. Horus, 3000 BCE. Osiris, 3000 BC. They're both born on December 20th on the same day?
Yes, of course.
Now, they're just starting off this thing real strong. Attis of Phrygia, 1400 BCE. Krishna, also same day, same year. What? Zoroaster, 1000 BCE. Mithra of Persia, 600. Hercules, Dionysus, Tammuz, Adonis, Hermes, Prometheus. Where are they getting any of this stuff from? And then it says on the bottom, if Jesus actually lived, he was born in the spring when Roman taxes were due. Where are they getting that from? What does that have to do with anything? Early Christian church leaders designated the winter solstice as Christ's birthday in order to stamp out demonic pagan gods and to conceive their followers that Jesus Christ was just another name for the God they already worships. Now, let's look at the bottom part. But for the common era, sometimes written as are they saying that's the same thing, or are they? I don't know.
No, they're saying this is before Common Era. Parentheses. Also, you could call it Common Era. Obviously, they don't realize BC and CE.
Yeah. What are they talking? So this is obviously someone who doesn't know anything. But
this came from an atheist on Twitter that I sent it to you. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that gets shared around. This is
what the tweet said. It's all stolen from the myth of Isis anyway. They retold with the patriarchal slant. Isis, virgin fertility goddess. Set killed Isis's husband, god Osiris. Set equals Satan. Horus, child of Osiris and Isis, pregnant virgin, who's also the reincarnation of Osiris. Same old myth. It's just like You could argue that Horus kind of is a living incarnation of his father when he rises up, because the myth is that Horus gets killed as a baby, goes down, and it's just like the Zagreus Dionysus myth. Dionysus gets killed as a baby, or Zagreus gets killed as a baby, and then he spends some time in Hades, and then comes up as Dionysus, and then what's it called? Same thing happens with Horus, but you can't say this is pregnant virgin. You can't say that Set is Satan. You can't say Mary. Like you're just what are you doing, man? Like if you, I don't know. What do you
Well,
think?
I mean, my whole thing is like, do you really think like Jewish writers or Christians like really wanted to copy this kind of stuff from paganism when we see early Christians detesting this kind of stuff? It seems like quite a logical leap there to me. I don't see any evidence that that's what's happening. Scholars don't really see any sort of connection there. With all these gods being born on December 25th, this is all modern myth. People jump on the conclusion. They'll jump to the conclusion that Mithra was born on December 25th. And then they start, somehow it gets transferred to all these other deities. And
I don't know.
so
I don't think any of these are even, you can't even argue for any of these. There's
no,
not even,
none of these.
there's no text or anything, inscriptions, fragments, nothing suggesting that any of these gods on this list are born on December 25th.
No, the only one is Sol.
People need to realize that it's not true. It's just not true.
Right. The only one is Sol that mentions any sort of
And
festival.
by the way, it's funny how Soul is the only one not on here. Like,
Yeah, I know.
At least put Soul on there. Damn. Now, if Jesus actually lived, he would be born in the spring when Roman taxes were due. What is that? What does that even mean?
I think they're going to the birth narrative in Matthew and Luke. They go to collect. They go for the census issue. Maybe that's what they're trying to think of when it comes to that. That's what I thought.
But isn't that passage? That passage could be months later, for all we know.
Yeah,
like
it
they
could
have a
be.
newborn baby at 6 months old, and they go, and you don't know. It's not like saying the next day they went down to enroll in the taxes. There are some scholars who think that there were, because I think it's Luke where they say there are shepherds out in the field, tending to their flocks. Is it Matthew or Luke?
It's in Luke. Yeah.
Luke, yeah. And so some scholars are saying the likelihood of that happening would be like in the time of the harvest. But that's still, you can't say, like, it's not like it's impossible. It's not like it's impossible that somebody shepherds could be out tending their flocks in the wintertime. I'm not saying that the reasoning behind it, I think, is smart and it's legit. Like, I can see why they say that, but it's not a slam dunk. Like, oh, we know he was born in September. You can't say that.
Yeah, they'll say that typically shepherds would only be out in the summer or in warmer times. And you also have to think that, we're talking about someplace in the Middle East. It doesn't get as cold as it would in like Northern Europe. So it's possible. But again, I don't know the day Jesus was born. I don't really care, honestly. I mean, we picked December 25th because of tradition, the early Christian idea that that's the date, and that's just the day we picked to honor it. I don't think we're ever going to really know the day Jesus was born, and that's okay, honestly.
Yeah,
I don't really care.
That's really important, is that the text doesn't say.
Right.
The text doesn't have that. There's no indication in the epistles or any of the text. So what do we do with that? It is what it is. Like, the text doesn't say, so you're never going to know for sure.
Well, I don't think Joseph and Mary would have known. I mean, we're talking about Jewish peasants from, Galilee and Judea. They didn't really have modern calendars. I mean, most people may not know the exact day. I remember I had a friend in the military, and he started dating a girl from Southeast Asia, and she came from a poor family. She didn't know how old she was because in her culture, they didn't really calculate. They didn't really care too much about that. And so what we see in a lot of other other cultures is sometimes they know the general age of someone, but they don't know the exact day and age. So I think that's probably what happened with Jesus. So they just didn't know the exact day because they were peasants.
I never thought about it like that, because you have a good point. If you're living in some part of the world that's not like highly educated, you don't have you can't like walk to the town square every day and see like the calendar sitting up there like Rome and have that. In the city of Rome, you'd walk down the street, there's a giant calendar on the wall, and they'd have a priest there every day marking the calendars and giving speeches like, today's the day, and the news is, they'd have a news reporter basically in the town, in the Palatine. And but like Nazareth probably wouldn't have that. Nazareth, you're basically like you're a farmer. Basically, you're out in the middle of nowhere on a hill with like a very small population of people. And so I never thought about that. If you had a baby, would you like mark by the sun? I don't know. What would you do? How would you mark you might not know exactly when he was. You probably would know the season it was.
Yeah, you might say, a couple weeks after like the Feast of Tabernacles or something.
Right. That's how you would say it. You'd say you were born right around the time of right around the time of the Yom Kippur or something. You would mark it that way, but you probably wouldn't have December 23rd at 4:00. You wouldn't be able to do that.
Oh, absolutely not. And that's why most people in the ancient world just didn't really celebrate their birthday. Probably didn't know exactly when it was. I mean, they may have known the general season, like you're born in like, planting season. That's how we remember, but I mean, no one knew the exact day.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. I never thought about it like that. Let's see. What else did I have to present?
I mean, I'll say flat out, I don't think any major Christmas custom goes back to paganism.
Sure. Yeah, I think okay. So basically from what we've been talking about so far, if anyone's just joining right now, we disagree on the whole gift giving thing in Saturnalia. I think the Christmas tradition of December, the 12 days of Christmas, all that stuff. I think that has its roots in Roman Saturnalia, influencing new traditions over time. I even think Yule is influenced by Saturnalia, because Saturnalia goes back as far as we can even it goes back to the Bronze Age. It goes back to a time when even Saturn was set. The Romans, according to Livy, the Romans adopted the Greek rites and applied it to their Saturn. They had a different Saturn than the Greek Kronos. And then that's been everything merged. And then you have the idea of Jupiter deposing Saturn, the myth. But before that, Saturn was just a god of agriculture. His name is to sow, Setter or whatever. And so it was an agricultural festival, because that's the time of the year when the sun starts to. Of course, you're going to celebrate that. That's like that, and that's another thing, is that you can have a winter solstice celebration pop up separately in different parts of the world, because they're seeing the same thing in the sky. They're paying attention to the sun. That's all you have to work. Like all your crops, all your life, all your everything is dependent on the sun. So you're going to pay attention to the movements of the sun. You're going to probably celebrate certain days on the same time of the year. It doesn't mean that it started in one spot and then, but like, you know what I'm saying? So That being said, when that festival, when Romans start spreading out into Gaul, like, these traditions spread out and influence new traditions. And I think the same thing happens with Christianity over a long period of time. December is already the season of relaxing, not working as much, enjoy your harvest, give gifts, let the poor be equal to the rich. That type of mentality is already sort of a thing in December. So Christianity, why would Christians stop that? So I don't think it's a matter of them changing or adopting or copying. I think it's a matter of it was already there. Why even get rid of it? So I think we disagree on that.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, for example, Yule, Snorri Sturluson says King Haakon the Good put Yule on December 25th to coincide with the festival of the Christians. So Yule probably wasn't on December 25th prior to that. I know Theitmar the chronicler says he saw the Danes sacrificing after January 6th.
Right.
Some have placed Yule originally mid-December.
That's what
it's really hard to say.
It probably was something like a Saturnalia. It probably was a festival of a month or a week or 2 weeks or whatever.
It was some winter festival for sure.
Exactly.
When it was, I honestly would say they probably moved from year to year. I mean, they didn't have an exact calendar, and they did a lot of calculations based on the moon. It's probably more likely that the Yule festival probably was different every time of the year, depending on when the priests of that world decided, now we can begin it. So my guess is it probably moved from year to year, similar to how Jewish feasts and festivals change from year to year.
Yeah. So I think that's where I think you and I agree on the December 25th thing being this like pagan thing that they're all copying from. There's no text to prove that. Even with Sol Invictus, you only have a 274 date for when they start doing that. So that's already late in the game anyway. And
Well,
then-
I mean, we don't even have a date that Sol Invictus was on December 25th in 274. The first mention of it is in 354 in the Philocalian calendar. Prior to that, we're extrapolating and trying to say, well, maybe it does, maybe it didn't. I tend to think Sol Invictus was actually placed on December 25th after Constantine, so that the pagans had a competing holiday.
Yeah, I get why you're saying that, because I can't say definitively one way or the other based off what Andrew was saying, because he made the point where it's like you could extrapolate and you could argue that it started with Aurelian, but you can't. It's not like we have a text that says today is the day Aurelian dedicated the temple to Sol Invictus, and today's December 25th. You kind of have to like extrapolate through the evidence. I agree with, I forgot the name of the scholar that Andrew mentioned, where I think you can. I think you can make the case that Constantine probably had these different traditions celebrating in the same time period anyway, and probably just made Christmas on that day just to make it makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember. So Thomas Tilly has a pretty good argument that Christmas was on December 25th prior to Constantine. There was a heretical group called the Donatists that split from Orthodox Christianity around, I think, 306, 308, sometime in there. And they kept all the feast dates prior to that. But they did not keep later feasts like the Feast of the Epiphany. This is what St. Augustine is later telling us. But they did celebrate Christmas on December 25th. So Thomas Tilly makes the argument that if they kept all the feast dates before their split, at the beginning of the 4th century, that would establish that Christians were already using the date of December 25th before Constantine.
Yeah, I'll look into that. Yeah, like I said, I'm probably. Oh, there's a couple of super chats. We'll go back to what I'm saying in a second. Let me read this out. Johnny, thank you for the super chat. I've read some Catholic writers such as Jimmy Aiken who think that the 1225 date is reasonable. For example, the J. Bap's father course in the temple.
Oh, Zechariah. Yeah, there are some Catholic theologians, historians that try to argue that the December 25th date has some connection based on Jewish feasts, that maybe that's when Zechariah was in the temple. I've seen some Catholic websites even try to argue that Jesus was born on December 25th based on calculating when Zechariah was in the temple, based on Jewish feasts. And I've read those and go, yeah, maybe. I've also read people argue that he was born in September or in August or in the spring. And I'm just like, yeah, maybe. I mean, we're not going to know because, again, Jewish peasants didn't have exact calendars at the time. So who knows?
Yeah. But I think when you combine the fact that we don't have it in the actual New Testament, no indication of when he's born, combined with the traditions that are already floating around of there being this like winter solstice thing, I think there's a little bit of kind of moving things around to make it fit. Would you agree with that or no?
Well, I think the Christians were interested in solstices and the patterns of the sun and the moon themselves. So if they're picking it, it's because they've already think there's some special significance about the movement of the stars and about aligning of certain solstices. I mean, there's a whole early Christian work on solstices and equinoxes. They thought those played an important role as well.
Yeah.
Pagans were interested in solstices and equinoxes as well. So if there is a connection, it's just that both groups were interested in solstices and thought important events happened on solstices. But that doesn't mean that the Christians were like, oh man, they really like December 25th. Let's put our holiday on there. I think that's kind of a leap. And again, there's disagreement about when the solstice was. I mean, some say the 22nd, 23rd, 25th, 26th. It wasn't an exact thing. And, we have no evidence prior to Constantine that it was a major holiday for any sort of pagan. It may have been, and we just lost the data, but we just don't have a lot of data. It's not in the Julio-Claudian fasti inscriptions, for example.
Well, to get technical, the winter solstice does change every year, but the Roman priests, the Pontifex Maximus and all those, they had knowledge of how to track these things. And so I'm not sure if they were pinpointed or not, but like, for example, this year's winter solstice is on, I'm looking at, I think, December 21st. Yeah. The dawn of 22nd. That's what it says. But it could be on the 23rd. It can be. It's all depending on the sun. You know what I mean? Because it's a solstice, and it fluctuates, but it's always between the 21st and the 25th. I think somewhere in those 4 days period.
Yeah,
in between there.
Well, I think the actual legend of why the legend that Christmas was put on December 25th because of paganism actually comes from Christians. So I think after Constantine, we have Saint Epiphanius saying that was the date of Saturnalia, and that's why you moved Christmas to that date, was because you wanted to place it on Saturnalia. So he gets the wrong date, the wrong reason, but he's upset because he thinks Christmas should be in January. January 7th.
That was his point. He was hostile to that because he thought that January. Now I want to get into this for a second. What's the reason behind January 6th being the Christ's birthday?
So that's the Greek Orthodox Church uses that date, but that's because they use it on the Julian calendar. And on the Julian calendar, that's December 25th.
So it's the same day, but it's just based on a different calendar.
In the Greek Orthodox, yeah, that's something I learned. But so the
calendar we're using right now, it would be on December 25th, Gregorian.
Mm-hmm.
So I see what you're saying. So that's why you get January 6th. Okay. And what was? Yeah, no. So that's what I'm gonna have hard. That's what people are gonna have a hard time with, like including myself.
Yeah.
Is the fact that we're getting the date from the day he died, and it's like, all right, well, what do you do with that? You know?
Well, I don't think Jesus was born on December 25th, to be honest. And I don't really care. It's just tradition now. It's just church tradition. But we also see in the 1200s or the 12th century, Christians start to try to say that Christmas was placed on December 25th because of paganism. So you get this infamous scriptor Sirius guy who some people have said he lived in the 4th century. It just means the Syrian scribe, but he makes marginal notes in some manuscripts in that time period and is saying that, it was placed on this day because of paganism. You also have a manuscript on solstices and equinoxes saying that who is it? John Chrysostom claimed that Pontius Maximus said there was a sol date on December 25th. But again, the earlier manuscripts of solstices and equinoxes don't mention this. So it seems like a later author updated the text and put that in there. So the whole legend of Christmas coming from a pagan holiday seems to have come from Christians at later times trying to figure out why December 25th was picked.
Well, that's another thing you have going for you is that the winter solstice and Saturnalia are not on the 25th anyway. So you have to go before 25th is already later than that. So you could just say, if someone says that they're just basing it off the winter solstice and Saturnalia, you can't say that because it's not on the same day. You can just, like I said, this has been my argument the whole time, and I'm just going to reinforce it. You can only argue that the traditions and the festivals of gift giving and you could only argue that those things were not borrowed, but just kept. It's not, like I said, it's not like you're copying anybody. It's just the same way it's always been.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I mean, if let's say like the Christians calculated that Jesus' birthday was on February 15th.
Yeah.
Well, they wouldn't have picked it because of Lupercalia. They picked it because that was according to their own calculations.
Yeah.
I mean, pagans have a
festival every month.
Pagans have a lot of festivals.
Yeah,
they have a lot of gods.
Yeah.
To me, it's just kind of ironic. They picked December 25th, and there's no evidence that there was actually a pagan festival on that date prior to the 4th century. It's just ironic to me that they happened to picking a date. There was no paganism.
And that's what it ultimately falls down. Like, to be completely stern in the facts, that's true. Like, you can't find anything before the 4th century that says anything happened on the 25th. No one celebrated anything on that day until way late in the game, and Christianity is already thriving at that time.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's literally a coin toss to see who did it first. We just can't know. You can't tell. I would lean my bet towards Sol, but I can't say 100% that that's true. It could be the other way around.
It could be, yeah. I tend to think that, I just think the pagans were mad that Christians were getting so much prominence because of Constantine, so they tried to put a holiday on that date. That's my general take of it.
It's possible.
But I mean, even if I'm wrong, it's like there's no reason a Christian picked that day because of paganism. And even if they did, I think it'd be cool. I actually kind of wish it because I like that whole triumphant reclamation mentality. Like, God has, we believe our God, created all the days of the year. What was that? Yeah,
Like a
polemic,
polemic, yeah.
exactly.
That makes
And
sense.
there's a lot of that in the Bible. I mean, there's a lot of Baal polemics in the Old Testament.
Yeah, that's a lot. That the Sumerians and Babylonians and Assyrians were always doing stuff like that. Like Marduk would take on the same, traits as Anu, but he'd be better somehow. He'd like flip him. He'd do something differently. Like that's just how it is. But let's look at a couple more of these real quick before we go.
This is what fundamentalist Christians spread around, this kind of crap.
Now, where did you get this from?
Well, I found it on that page that you got banned from, but they were using it among Christians.
Normalizing atheism.
Yeah, you got banned from there, and so
Yeah.
this is something fundamentalist Christians spread around to say don't celebrate Christmas because it's evil. I don't know what they're talking about.
Santa equals anagram of Satan.
It's like, yeah, sure.
Santa means saint in Spanish. Do they know that?
No, they're not that intelligent.
It just means saint in Spanish. That's all it is. By the way, this is hilarious. So my Mithraism video it's well received, but obviously there's some hate comments in there. And so one of the comments was, "Where are you gonna tell us that Santa Claus existed too?" And I'm like, well, that's actually a really bad example because there actually is a historical Saint Nicholas, and he was mythologized. So you just walked into your own punch on that one. That was a bad idea.
Yeah. He was a real person. For sure.
There is a real person there. Did he fly in a sleigh with giving Christmas presents to the whole world? No, it didn't happen. But he's jolly old Saint Nick still exists. So sorry. I mean, that's just a horrible example for that.
People will say Santa Claus comes from paganism, but as they point out in this book, that's actually the other way around. It seems that Santa was a whole American custom idea. The Dutch immigrants in New York were very interested in St. Nicholas, and they revamped him, put him part of with the Christmas celebration to make it more family-oriented. And then as Santa was exported around the world, he started to blend with like pagan deities like Jolapuki or, other areas as well. But it was totally a Christian idea that just actually got blended with paganism after this fact, surprisingly.
Yeah, I was reading through John Matthews' Winter Solstice. This is a folklorist, and they're talking about Saint Nicholas in here. But there also was a point that I wanted to throw at you because I thought you were going to mention this tonight, but you didn't. But I'm going to give you a softball for you to slant. There's a case to be made that the holly, the prickly leaves of the holly, and the berries that are red are a symbol of the crucifixion of the crown of thorns and blood, because it's real prickly and it's round. Looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how true that is or where that. I don't know. I have no idea where that comes from, but that's what this person's pointing out. And this is not somebody who's a Christian in front of us at all. This is somebody who's like pointing out all the Saturnalia stuff like I was talking about. But anyways, I just thought that was interesting that they pointed that out. I don't know what you think about that.
I mean, there's folklore traditions about it that spring up. People sort of get that idea. Like there's some ideas that holly had special powers. It was involved in folklore medicine.
Right.
Some people thought it could cure asthma or other conditions like gout even. So people just had these different theories about it. And then, these things just kind of spring up in European folk traditions all the time. I don't think it goes back to anything with remotely connected with the crucifixion. It probably came from Europeans thinking like, hey, this kind of reminds me of something, like the crown of thorns.
That's probably what happened, I would say.
Oh yeah. I remember as a kid hearing legends like the reason the robin has a red belly is because when Jesus was on the cross, the robin came and rested his breast upon Jesus to try to comfort him, and it turned it red. And now that's the reason all robins have red breasts or something. I'm like, obviously that didn't happen, but people make up those kind of legends all the time.
Yeah. I'm trying to find the St. Nicholas page in here. It's pretty good, but that's not that important actually. There's just a lot of the actual person, St. Nick. What did he do again? Do you remember? It's in here, right?
Well, there's a lot of legends about him. He seemed to the biography of him is written in like that. And it's different depending on which version you read, but generally it's there was this old poor guy who had to sell his 3 daughters into slavery because he didn't have any money. So he's going to sell his daughter one day, but the night before, the bag of gold was found at the doorstep or something. The next day, it was found like from the chimney. Some legends say that on the third night he threw another one in and landed in a.
Huh?
Yeah, some say he dropped it down the chimney. Some say that he threw it through the window and it landed in a stocking by the fireplace. It really depends on which legend you read, but generally the legend is Saint Nicholas gave this poor man gold so he didn't have to sell his daughters into slavery. So he's a gift-giving saint, and he helps out children, especially. So that's generally where it comes from. How real it is, we don't know. It comes from many years later. Like it wasn't written, within lifetime of eyewitnesses of Nicholas or anything like that.
Yeah, that's which is pretty standard for most folklore stuff. Johnny, thank you for the $1 super chat. Appreciate that. What else did I want to? I forgot what else I wanted to bring up. What's this one? The war on Christmas is real. It happened centuries ago when Christian armies invaded Europe, stole pagan traditions, and renamed their holiday after forcing them to convert at the point of a sword. That's just a really generalized sweeping of history. Like it is. It's not that simple. You know what I mean?
Well, like some Christians did do that. Like that was what Emperor Charlemagne was doing until the monks, for example, I forget the guy's name. What is it? Alcuin, the monk Alcuin's told him to stop doing that. Like people need to convert because of free choice. You can't force them to convert to Christianity.
Right.
So, I mean, there were Christians pushing back against that idea. And there were Christians, sometimes, rulers that tried to forcibly convert people. It happens. But I mean, generally the monks like Alcuin or St. Martin didn't do that. It was about free choice kind of thing. So that, and if they did steal traditions, sure, sometimes it probably did happen here or there, but I mean, who cares? It's like it's not a problem for Christians. It happens, as I mentioned, it happened in Acts 17 when Paul takes the words of Aratus and applies them to the God of Israel.
What is that? Can you repeat that? What he says again?
Paul?
Yeah.
So in Acts 17, he says he's in Athens and he's speaking before the people there, and he says, and as some of your own poets have said, in him we live and move and have our being, and we are his offspring. We think the first quote might be from Epimenides. The second one comes from one of the poems of Aratus, and he was a pantheist Stoic.
Yeah. Aratus is one who gives us the star charts. Who, when we look at that's like really, really important that we found that survives to us, because the star maps of Aratus match up with the Babylonian star maps, which tells us that the zodiac's been this pretty much the same thing for as long as we've been recording records, which is very fascinating. Like very,
that is.
You would think there would be like different zodiacs in different parts of but like the Babylonian zodiac was pretty much standardized. Like those are the constellations, and that's what it is. Even from the Sumerian tablets to Aratus, they stay pretty much the same with minor fluctuations, minor changes, though.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, and you have one more that I wanted to. Worldly Christians be like, you need to put Christ back in Christmas, and I'm like, Christmas is a pagan holiday. Now is there something you want to say about this one?
I mean, it's just false. I mean, Christ already is in Christmas. Christmas. That's what it means. It comes from the word Christ. I mean, and I always find it funny when they say Christmas is a pagan holiday, considering that the name Christmas comes from Christ. It's like, you guys didn't think that one through.
What are your thoughts on people celebrating other religions? There are other people, celebrating the holidays in their own way, whether it be pagan or Kwanzaa or whatever.
I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, do what you want. I mean, I think.
The only reason why I asked you that is because I want people to realize you're not one of those. You're not one of those like far right wing, like Christmas needs to be celebrated. We need to make it a state religion type of thing.
Oh God, no. I'm firmly against ideas like Christian nationalism. I have been very vocal against those ideas. I did a whole video on Christian nationalism earlier this year, and we did not speak highly of it. So no, I am not for that kind of stuff.
That's good to know.
Yeah,
I
want to be very clear. I am 100% against Christian nationalism, even though I'm a Christian. I don't even think Christian nationalism is Christian, to be honest.
Yeah. What was I going to ask you? Oh yeah, that's what I want to ask you. So, what's the other tradition for Christmas being on? I think it's Wait, isn't there another one? I think we talked about it. January 6th is the other one. Was
Yeah,
there any more on top of that? That other not from outside, but like from Christian
well,
theology?
I mean, early Christians didn't know the date. You have Clement of Alexandria thinking it might be in November. He mentions other people celebrating it at different times of the year. So early on, people were, Christians
Wow,
wanted
I didn't
to
know that.
celebrate. Yeah, Clement of Alexandria mentions it. I'll get you the reference if you need it. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he mentions, different Christians celebrating on different days, and he thought it was sometime towards the end of the year, around November. So early on, we see Christians saying maybe it falls in around that time that we eventually get December 25th. So you get this idea is that maybe it's in January, December, November, kind of early on. And then that just seems where Christians started to gravitate to. And by the time of Apologists of Rome, I think Christians were basically had picked December 25th.
Yeah, that makes sense. Here we go. We got one. Mithra was born on December 25th, and that's the religion of the Romans followed prior to Christianity. The umbrella term pagan is profoundly dismissive. I agree with that last part. The umbrella term pagan is profoundly dismissive. I agree.
Yeah.
I think people just throw pagan over everything that's not whatever their religion is. I mean, there were some Jewish people who call Christians pagans. I mean, people who call Zoroastrians pagans. They find that very offensive. So I think it should be more practice to specify what practice you're talking about, whether it be followers of, I don't know, Norse tradition or people who worship Dionysus. I don't know, whatever it is. But like the word pagan, definitely. But the first part, let's talk about that. You want to respond to that?
Pure and utter nonsense. It's the best thing I could put it. The religion of the Romans, like they worshipped Jupiter, and they took the Greek pantheon and it became the Roman pantheon. They worshipped Sol. Mithras was a cult in the Roman Empire.
Mithras with an S at the end. But that's
Mithras,
also that's not the same as Sol Invictus either.
No, definitely not. So obviously they just haven't read a lot of history here. Mithra was not the main god of Rome, and Romans worshipped a plethora of gods. There was a Mithraic cult in the Roman Empire, but that was sort of like it was like a supplement to the traditional state religion. You worship the emperor, you worship the gods, the traditional pantheon, and then you could also be part of this Mithraic cult as like a supplement. There was a lot of different mystery cults like that, where you could sort of do it as sort of like an addition to your traditional state religion.
Yeah. Now, 706 easy. I'm just going to ask you, just challenge you. Try to find a text or even just an inscription on some column somewhere where it says that Mithra was born on December 25th. And if you could find it, you'll be very, very famous. Like you'll be the first person to find it. Like scholars are looking for that because it doesn't exist as far as I know. And is it possible somewhere out there in the world? Maybe, but you can't say it's the truth because we don't know that. It doesn't exist. So that's my challenge to you. 706 easy. Try to find that text, and then and then prove us wrong. Because I agree with you on this. Is Michael it just doesn't exist. It's just not real. It's just not true. Here's one. Jesus was born on January 32nd when the Bills win the Super Bowl. Nice. Yes, we just won yesterday, so that's why I'm wearing this. So, I'm in the spirit right now. But
I always feel bad for Buffalo Bill fans because you guys went to the Super Bowl 4 times in a row and lost all four
times in a row. And that was my first. I was born in '89. Those are the first 4 years of my life growing as a baby. I probably have some what do you call it? Some like deep, I don't know, problems because of that or something.
Saddest thing ever.
Yeah. The first 4 years of my life is a whole like completely depressed city, like losing their minds over a football game. They made a movie. They made a movie called Buffalo 66. Christina Ricci's in it. And this is like a throwback movie from, I want to say, late 90s probably. And this is the whole plot of the movie. Dude bets on the Bills. It's the fourth time they're in the Super Bowl. He's like, they can't lose this one. They're gonna win this one. He bets all his money on the Bills they lose. So instead of paying the debt, the bookie was like, "All right, do this jail bid for me because I'm in trouble." So he goes to prison. He gets out of prison, and the whole time he was in prison, he was calling his parents and saying he was away at college. So when he gets out of prison, he kidnaps Christina Ricci and brings him back to her parents' house. It's filmed in Buffalo. It's actually in Kenmore, in the town that I live in. You see the houses and everything. And the whole rest of the movie, he's trying to find the kicker that kicked the wide right and try to kill him. That's the whole movie, dude. He's trying to kill the kicker because he lost. Such a good movie. It's worth checking out. Derek from Myth Vision Podcast says Michael Jones looks better on his OnlyFans page.
I told him not to tell anyone about that page.
Damn,
Okay?
it's out there. It's leaked now.
All right. You can't mention my ulterior personality, Eduardo Cessier.
I don't know. Is there anything else you want to talk about Christmas traditions?
Not unless there's anything you want. I could take questions from the live chat or anything like that. I wish, as I said, because I'm all for triumphant reclamation. I'm all for the idea of Christmas coming from paganism. I just see no evidence of it. I don't think that is a reasonable position to hold to at this point. Christians calculated the date because of their own reasons, and a lot of the customs that are associated with Christmas come out of European folk traditions. Just because they may sometimes sound pagan, like, Christmas tree, and we know the pagans had sacred trees. That doesn't mean there's a connection. And the quote from these two scholars, Simpson and Rode, who wrote this book, they say there is an important distinction between showing that a custom or belief is older than Christianity and arguing that when it was found among Christians, it means paganism is still alive. Some aspects of the supernatural, i.e. fear of ghosts, witchcraft, belief in dreams, are so commonplace they can occur in virtually any period, including our own, and do not correlate with one religion rather than another. There is thus no general framework to support claims that individual folklore items are pagan survivals. So that's all I would say with regard to that.
Yeah, and by the way, if anyone has any questions, just throw them in the chat. We'll get to them before we close this thing out. But I would say, just to conclude my thoughts on this, I think people go too far with it, with the whole December 25th thing. Like, this is just complete nonsense. When you see stuff like this, you should reject it. But I can say that if I had a bet on this, I would confidently bet on there being some influence in the tradition of, the rituals of gift giving, of decorating, of, being merry and, just laying low for a couple weeks during the wintertime. I would say, but like I said, I'm gonna make this point very clear. There's just no reason to not do that if it's already happening every year. Like, Christians are not just going to be like, oh, they're not going to be like fundamentalists, ISIS, where they're going to come in and say, no more gift giving during Christmas. Like, they're not going to, that would just be ridiculous. And so I think that it's more logical to say those traditions are already in place. Just like McClellan pointed out, it's not accurate to say that Christmas is pagan. But you can argue that some of the traditions that were already in place just stayed that way.
It's possible. I think those are just general ideas. I think Christians just came up with them on their own in later centuries. But I mean, it is what it is. It's possible, but I wouldn't connect that to any sort of pagan ritual or something. As you said, gift giving is just a general thing people like to do.
Yeah. That's right. I think I just had one more thing. Oh, this is from Mary Beard's book, Religions of Rome. She has the Saturnalia layout, what they would do, and how they would decorate. They would hang birds up. Let's see. She has like notes for it. The month of December, the mask alluding to games or disguise played at the festival. That's the thing that Christians don't do. That's another thing. We didn't talk about the things that Saturnalia does that Christians don't do. That's another thing we didn't even get into. So there's a thing, right? That's different than Christmas. The costume of the male figure has been variously interpreted. The short tunic has been taken to indicate a slave. Let's see. Yeah. And then
you could argue that the misrule tradition may be a Saturnalia tradition. You know what that is?
No, what's that?
So the Lord of Misrule was this thing that happened at Saturnalia. And generally what they would take, like the poor person in the town, and he'd be king, for a day.
Oh, king of Saturnalia. Yeah.
Now, there's a custom that started in Europe around the time of King Edward III, called the Lord of Misrule. Same thing. Same kind of idea. You take this poor person around, he's king for a day. And Tanya Gulovich in Encyclopedia of Christmas and New Year said, this may be a Saturnalia thing, but they may have just started independently on their own. I mean, it's a holiday. You're going to do things that are out of the ordinary on holidays. You give gifts, work. So it could be, but it also died out, after a couple centuries. Like, it's not popular anymore.
And I think that fits perfectly with my own take on this, is that if those traditions are already in place, why change it? Like, you're not copying. You just, hey, this is fun. Keep it going. Like, well, you know what I mean? It's just like, that seems more likely to me, especially like something like that, something specific, like having the person who's a slave become the king for a day. Very specific thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also possible, like you said, it's also possible that it came up on completely differently. That's possible.
Possible. It's interesting if it somehow, it did survive with it, but we just don't have any record of it.
Yeah. Let's see what we got for comments. Is there a Holy Hatred Day?
Yeah, it's called Festivus.
Russians celebrate in January 6th. Yeah, because the Russian tradition comes out of the Orthodox.
Mm.
In fact, I just found this out maybe a couple months ago, actually, that when Constantinople was raided and became, taken over by Mehmed II, the entire church, basically all the big names, all the what is it? It's not the Pope. What is it called? The high priest,
I believe.
Patriarch. Yeah, that whole entire congregation fled to St. Petersburg, and they set up there. So the Russian Orthodox Church has their roots in the original Greek Orthodox Church.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they have a claim in like the original Greek church that Constantine set up, and it's true. You could actually make that case. But yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
January 6th, though, isn't that weird how you have that happens on the same day as what recently? I just thought about that. I didn't realize that until just now, because there was a lot of people. There's a lot of people in that crowd that were like going hard, like, Jesus is going to come and he's going to win the election for us.
Oh my gosh. People need to stop predicting Jesus is going to return in their lifetime. I'm sick and tired of that. I don't believe it.
I don't even think, what I think is even more ridiculous than that is thinking that Jesus cares about politics.
Oh yeah. I did a video about a year ago in January called Keep Jesus Out of Politics.
I think that's a good video. I didn't even watch it yet, but I think that's a good point. I mean, especially if you actually take a look at like what the church was, or what the New Testament says, like, he's Jesus. If you were to grant that everything that's in the New Testament coming out of the lips of Jesus, that he actually said all those things, you cannot then say that he'd be right wing. Sorry, but I don't think you can say that. I'm not saying he's going to be a full blown liberal, like he's going to be like, supporting the Democrat Party either. He probably wouldn't care about them either. But you cannot just sit there and be like, yeah, he's a Republican. I just don't think you can do that.
Well, everyone tries to claim Jesus for their politics, and it's to me, it's sacrilegious. Like, stop it.
Right. Well, this has been a good discussion. I think we at least agree on some of the people who go too far with it. But yeah. Anything else you want to say?
No, I'm glad to do it because I'm always happy to debunk this myth year after year. And the main reason I actually started getting into this is because of fundamentalist Christians who were actually trying to teach this idea that, Christmas is pagan, so Christians need to stop celebrating it. And it just bothered the hell out of me because I'm like, oh yeah, we're supposed to be afraid of pine trees now. Like, this is ridiculous. So that's what actually got me sort of going on this whole topic. It was nothing to do with atheists bringing it up. It was Christians that were bothering me, trying to, become very legalistic in their understanding of how they're supposed to worship Christ. And you can't do it by decorating your house in evergreen once a year because somehow that cancels, your, devotion to Christ for some reason. It's ridiculous.
It's a good point. And there's your channel, Inspiring Philosophy. Go subscribe. And you have just attained true gnosis.
Oh no.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over